So that right there is a clip of my Lorde Homemade Dynamite remix that I made a couple months back as part of a Triple J remix competition. And it is by far the largest project that I've ever made, with over 100 tracks. I can't exactly remember how many there are, but it is quite a lot. So today I thought I'd give a quick rundown of how the track was made and just show why I ended up using so many different layers. And quickly before I get started, if you like the sound of this song, I'll leave a link in the description. I never uploaded it anywhere apart from my Triple J Unearthed profile, just because I didn't want to run into any copyright issues. But yeah, it is probably my favorite song that I've ever made, so it might be worth checking out. Anyway, I think it's time to check out the project. Let's do this. So yeah, here it is, the largest project that I've ever made, and look how big it is on the scroll bar even. I've tried to keep this project as clean as I can, but it is pretty hard when there are this many tracks. And since there are so many tracks, I should probably just start from the start of the song and work my way to the end. So to start off, we'll go to the intro. So this is what the intro section sounds like all together, minus the vocals because copyright. So this is pretty much made up by using a few instruments and doing a lot of layers. So I think the most important part in this intro section would have to be this Rhodes synth that I have. And I know that's how you spell Rhodes, that's what the preset's called. So this is what it sounds like by itself. I can't show you exactly how I made that synth because it went through so many stages of resampling and stuff like that. So I don't actually have the original plugin anymore, but it is pretty much just a basic Rhodes synth with a few filters on it. And then I've just cut it up and messed around with it a little bit. And then like a lot of things in this project, I've done a lot of doubling of instruments. So we have the Rhodes and then we have this other Rhodes which is played up higher. And then I've taken that and I've pitched it up and added on a few other things. Like you can see that we just have some pan and another filter on there. Pretty easy. I think that's the main thing about this project, is that there is a lot of doubling. You'll see what I mean later on. So I guess the next most important thing for the intro would be this arpeggio sound that I made. So I've just gone into the original project, the project that I had before I made them all into stems, just so I can show you this arpeggio sound. So basically just took this sound that I made in analog and put on a few effects. So like everything else in the song, I've just got a whole lot of reverb, some delay, compression, and as well as an arpeggiator. And I think what makes it sound so unique is that the arpeggiator isn't set to a specific time. And so I've basically just taken that sound, messed with it a few times, adding effects, resampling it, pitching it about, reversing it, all that kind of stuff. And then I ended up with what I have in the finished song, which is this. And then pretty much the only other thing that makes up the intro is this little synth thing that I made here, just by taking a clip out of the original vocals and bringing it into a simpler, and then just playing some chords on it, and this is what it sounded like. Pretty basic stuff. Oh, actually, one more thing. I ended up putting these strings in here. And they're just an edited version of strings that I have later in the song, which I'll be getting to very soon. But yeah, this is what it all sounds like when it's put together. I think the thing that I like the most about this song is that there are a lot of things that are out of time. Like the wobbliness on this Rhodes sounds completely random, as well as the arpeggio that I made. I think it just helps add character to it. So now I'm going to move on to the second half of the intro, and I only added in a couple more instruments for this. So I put in some drums, which are pretty basic. I'm not going to go through all the little sounds that I did, but one of the most interesting things about this is, well, it's interesting for me because I don't usually do this much, but that is the amount of snares that I used. So usually I would just use sort of like 2 snare sounds, but for this song, I ended up using a lot more than that. So I have my main snare, which is this one here, and then I've layered that up with 3 other snares, one with a really large reverb, and then I've got ahead and added on a clap, as well as a snap. So this is what they all sound like together. And there's a lot more reverb than there definitely would be for any of my snares, but I thought it just suited the tone of the song more. So yeah, I left it in. So what else did I add in? I put in a bass, which sounds like this. And that sound is actually just a preset from one of the Korg synths. I can't remember which one. And then I've just put on a lot of effects. So if you look at my chain here, it's got a lot more going on than there usually should be for a bass line, but I think it works. So I have my dry sound here. And then I've also added on a wet one, which has a reverb, and that's about all. It's pretty quiet, but I like the sound of it. It adds in some reverb without making it too busy. And then I've also gone ahead and put in these other channels, which is pretty much just the same thing, but with two different types of reverb. So they all have different amounts of pre-delay and decay time. So one sounds like this on the right channel, and the other one sounds like this on the left channel. And then the last channel that I've done is I've just put in this little ping pong delay here, and I only have it come in when the dry bass sound isn't playing. It's actually pretty hard to hear. I'll turn it up a little bit. So it's just got that little tail that comes off and then leads into the next note. And then on top of all of that, I just have an auto filter, which really helps change up the sound. So this is what it sounds like with no auto filter. Sounds pretty boring, but once you put an auto filter on it, it sounds like this. So yeah, that's why I did that. And yeah, I think that's pretty much everything. So I just changed up some of the instruments for this section, like these arpeggios. They sound pretty similar, but they have different effects on them, especially this double sound. But yeah, that's pretty much all for that section. So this is what it all sounds like when it's put together. And yeah, I think that's all for that section. So now we'll move on to the pre-chorus, which is where things start to get a little more interesting. So everything in this section is pretty much the same as in the intro sections, just with some different automation curves and stuff like that. So all the filters are building up rather than just sitting still. So everything starts to filter off towards the end of the build-up, but apart from that, everything is just pretty much the same as from the intro. But what I wanted to do is I really wanted to make this build into the drop. So what I did is I took the synth from the drop, which I'll cover in the next section. So basically just took that sound and had it build up into the drop using different reverbs and filters and stuff like that. I feel like that just really helps bring up the energy of the song and sort of gives you something to expect later on. And then so this next element is probably the last thing that I added in the song, and that is the orchestral section. So all of these sounds here, I think there's about 13 of them. All of these sounds came out of East West's Symphonic Orchestra, I think that's what it's called. And I basically just took a lot of those sounds and tried to build up as many layers as I could. So I have a lot of the same sort of instruments playing the same thing, just at different octaves or slightly out of time. I wanted to make it sound as real as I could without wasting like hours. I think it turned out pretty well. So to start things off, I had this violin. And then I added in two more violins. They might have been from different mic positions, I can't really remember right now. And I can't open up the original plugin because I don't actually own it anymore. It's got like a monthly subscription thing and I only pay for it when I need it, so I don't have it right now. But yeah, so I added these two violins on top of the already existing violins, and I just panned one hard right and one hard left. And so when they're all put together, they sound like this. And then next up I added in some violas. So the way that I did these is that I played the same notes in the same plugin, but I made two different channels, one where the velocity was higher, and then another one when it was lower. This just gave it slightly different tones, and I've panned one to the right and one to the left. And I think it helps create some sort of double effect. So what is next? Tuba. That was pretty straightforward. It's just some lower notes in the second half. Okay, up next, trumpets. So I made the trumpet sound to match the synth sound, which builds into the drop, and it just plays some harmony notes. It's pretty simple. It's not a very good sounding trumpet either, but I laid that up with some trombones, one to the left and a slightly different one to the right, and together they sound like this. And then next up is some French horns, and they sound like this. So all those are doing is playing harmony notes to the string section. They're pretty soft for a French horn, but it just helps add in some lower frequencies. They don't really need to be there, but they're there. Okay, and now for the last ones, a double bass and a cello. So I think that these ones here just play the same thing, just one octave apart. And so this is what the orchestra section sounds like when they're all played together. So I think that section leads us nicely into the next part, which is the drop. So I think this is where things start to get a little bit more complex. So of course there is a drum track, which is pretty much just the same as the first verse drums. I think it is actually pretty much exactly the same, just with a few more cymbals added in. Yeah, that's pretty much the same, not worth going through it. So I think I'll go into the more boring instruments first. So first up, there's just a sub bass. It's just the same sine wave sort of sub bass that I've made in all of my other videos. So there's not much point going through that. There's actually some strings on this section, which I would have just cut from the pre-chorus strings. So I would have just taken that stem and I would have just added on a few different effects. And then so those strings are meant to be paired with the synth here. And so the synth is pretty basic. I think it is actually made in analog, and it is just some saw waves with some noise. And I've just taken that and put on a very heavy sidechain, as well as a little filter. You can hear it sort of pull off towards the end. And then it builds back in. So I would have just automated that rather than having it in the actual sound. Yeah. So I think we must have the same arpeggio in here. Yeah, so there's just the same arpeggio from the other sections, but it is slightly different. And I've also got this other arpeggio here, which I think might have been a preset. I'm not too sure. But I took that preset and then I slowed it down to half the speed, and then I also added on some reverb, a delay, and a filter. And then it just ends up sounding like this. All of these sounds sound pretty basic when they're all by themselves, but once they're all put together, they sound a lot better. And so now I think it's time to go on to the most important part of this drop, is that reese bass sound that I have, this one here. So for this one, I'm actually going to go back into the original project so I can show you how I made it. And if I remember correctly, it is a lot more complicated than you'd expect. So this is a reese bass, which I made a pretty long time ago. But the first time I actually used it was in this song, and yeah. So the main sound for this reese bass actually sounds pretty lame when it's by itself. So I just made it an operator, and this is how it originally sounds without any effects on it. Oh, that's really lame. So to make this reese bass sound a little bit more interesting, I split it into 3 different chains. So we've got a pretty dry one here, which is just an overdrive, chorus, and an EQ. And then I pretty much duplicated that and added in a notch filter, as well as a... what is that? Flaunch? Is that a flanger? I don't know. Whatever a flaunch is, I added that in. So that track sounds like this. And then I also made a reverb chain, which sounds like this. So when you play them all together, they end up sounding like this. So it still sounds pretty lame, which is why I went ahead and added on some more things. So I just added on a limiter to make it sound a lot louder, a compressor, and an auto filter. I don't think the filter does anything, but it's there. And I also put on another chorus and then an erosion. So this is what it sounds like with all of these effects so far. It's starting to sound a lot better, but it's still not good enough for me apparently. So I've then taken the sound and split it into 2 different chains again. And one chain is just a really wet reverb. It's a pretty shallow reverb, so it's got a really short decay time and just a little bit of pre-delay. So it sounds pretty close to the original sound, but it just sounds a bit more squashed in. It's kind of hard to explain. It just sounds like it's coming from a different area in the room or something like that. And then for the second chain, I added on a pitch shifter, which just took it up an octave, and then I added on a reverb and a imager. So that chain sounds like this. Nice. And then so when those 2 chains are played together, they sound like this. It's It's not too bad, but since I put on the reverb, it made it a lot quieter, so I just added on some compression just to bring the volume back up again. So with all of the effects chains on it, it sounds like this. Damn, I like that sound. The compressor also just has a side chain on it as well, which helps it duck out of the way. So it sounds pretty good right there, but I went on and added on some more layers. So I added on this track here, which is actually just a preset sound, and it sounds like this. But what I did is I just added on 2 different reverbs for some reason, and then so it ended up sounding like this. Cool. So what else did I add in? So pretty much just duplicated the original reese sound that I made, but I distorted this one here, and I think I dropped it down an octave. And so this one just plays underneath the normal reese sound, and I just think it helps make it sound a bit more dirty, roughens it up a little bit. And then alongside those sounds, I made some left and right doubles. So these ones here would pretty much just be the same thing as the original reese sound, but I put some slightly different reverb channels on the left track and the right track. And then I've also pitched them up an octave. And I think that those just help fill out the higher frequencies. So we have one more thing left in the drop synth, and it is pretty basic. So this sound here just helps fill in the gaps. It is just the same reese bass sound with a few slightly different parameters. It's also got a filter on it. Okay, so I just found one more sound which is layered on top of all the other sounds. So this one here is actually just a preset as well, and I just put a lot of distortion on it and a reverb. So that one sounds like this. So now that I'm back in my mixdown project, I thought I'd just play this reese bass sound again, so that you can try hear all the different layers that I put in, and see how they all work together. So yeah, here we go. The thing that I like about this reese sound is that it started off as really basic sounding sounds. Another thing that I like is that it is completely made using Operator. Make the most of your stock plugins, I say. Who needs Serum? So there's one more thing that is layered on top of this reese bass. It is this vocal chop here. So that's just the chop of Lorde's vocals, and then I've heavily distorted it and added on some reverb, and then I just matched it to the melody of the reese bass, and yeah. So pretty much just the last thing that I have to show is the vocal chops in the drop, and they're actually pretty simple. I just took the original vocals, chopped it up a little bit, and added on a lot of distortion, as well as a few other effects like some chorus and some reverb. And then I pretty much just took that and did the exact same thing over again, and I ended up with this. And then I'm guessing that I also did the same thing but an octave down. So yeah, when you layer those 3 tracks of vocal chops on top of each other, this is what you get. Sounds a lot better than just a really basic vocal chop with no other layers on. I like it. And then, yeah, that's pretty much everything. So once again, I think I'll just play the drop section so you can hear all of the different sounds played at once. So here we go. Not bad. That is not bad at all. I actually really like that. So yeah, I think that's pretty much where I'm going to end the walkthrough. The song does go on further, but I feel like there isn't much changes. Everything's just sort of looping over. There is a few automation changes here and there, and I might add in a few more extra elements, but to be honest, that is pretty much the core song right there. But yeah, I think I got all of the important elements out of the way, so yeah, that'll do it. So the main reason why I wanted to make this video was just to show how much of a difference adding multiple layers to a song can make. This song is actually pretty simple, but the use of adding layering and doubling really makes a song sound a lot more powerful and punchy. I did end up using a lot of different instruments in the song, but they were all pretty much playing the exact same thing. So even though the track was pretty busy, it didn't necessarily come across that way. Now using this many layers won't work with every song. It really just depends on the mood that you're going for. But I do think it is a good idea to make multiple layers anyway, and then you can just eliminate sounds that you don't need during the mixdown process. Or you might find out that these layers work out in different areas of the song. But yeah, I think that wraps up today's video. Hopefully this video was helpful to some of you, and I'm sorry if you wanted me to go into more detail about the song. I just think if I ended up going through every little step of the song, the video would probably be a couple of hours. But anyway, I think that's pretty much everything. Thanks for watching everybody. Bye!